She signed the marriage certificate thinking she'd married a businessman, not realizing the bedroom had a lock on the outside and soundproof walls for a reason. 3 ex-wives, all gone within a year, and the housekeeper wouldn't meet her eyes when she asked why the master suite had restraints built into the bed frame disguised as decorative ironwork. By the time she discovered what stamina training meant in his world, and why his doctor visited twice weekly with unmarked pharmaceutical bags, the annulment window had already closed, and her family's debt had been paid with her signature. Welcome to K-Fairy Tales Stories, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. Funmi Adeyemi stared at the marriage certificate in her trembling hands, the ink still wet from where she'd signed her name 20 minutes ago. The civil ceremony had been quick, efficient, sterile. No family, no friends, just her, the man she'd agreed to marry, and a bored government official who'd processed their paperwork like it was a DMV transaction. Her father's medical bills were paid. The loan sharks circling her family's modest Lagos home had been called off. Her younger sister could continue university without interruption. All it cost was her freedom, and a signature on a document that bound her to a man she'd met exactly twice before today. Kang Min-ho stood across the registry office, speaking in low tones to his assistant, a severe woman named Mrs. Choi who'd handed Funmi the marriage contract 3 weeks ago with all the warmth of a debt collector. He was beautiful in the way dangerous things are beautiful. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that seemed to calculate everything. A body that moved with predatory grace despite the expensive suit that probably cost more than her family made in a year. At 35, he was 12 years older than her, a pharmaceutical executive with connections that stretched from Seoul to Singapore, and according to the gossip Mrs. Choi had reluctantly shared, he'd been married 3 times before. All the marriages had ended within a year. All 3 ex-wives had left Korea immediately after the divorces were finalized. None of them ever spoke about their time as Mrs. Kang. The drive to his home, their home now, took 40 minutes through Seoul's affluent Gangnam district. Funmi sat in the back of the Mercedes, separated from Minho by the center console and what felt like an ocean of unspoken expectations. He worked on his tablet, occasionally taking calls in rapid Korean that she couldn't follow despite her 3 months of language study. She'd come to Korea 6 months ago for a teaching position that fell through when the academy suddenly closed. Stranded, visa expiring, family depending on remittances she could no longer send, she'd been desperate enough to answer Mrs. Choi's advertisement for a contractual marriage. Foreign wife needed, the posting had said, for businessman seeking to establish international family ties. 1-year minimum commitment, generous compensation, separate living arrangements possible. She'd thought it meant she'd have her own space, her own room at least. The house rose before them like something from a luxury magazine. Modern architecture, all glass and steel, nestled into a hillside with views of the Han River. Beautiful isolated. The nearest neighbor was hidden behind tall walls and manicured hedges. Minho exited the car first, waiting as she gathered her single suitcase, the sum total of her possessions in this country. His hand touched the small of her back as he guided her inside, and she felt the heat of it through her simple cotton dress. The foyer was massive, marble floors reflecting the chandelier overhead. A woman in a gray uniform appeared, middle-aged with kind eyes that went carefully blank when she saw Funmi. "This is Mrs. Park," Minho said in English, his accent perfect and somehow making her skin prickle with awareness. "She manages the household. Anything you need, ask her." Mrs. Park bowed slightly but didn't smile. "Your room is prepared," she said, and something about the way she emphasized your made Funmi's stomach tighten. Minho led her up a curved staircase to the 2nd floor. The house was beautiful but cold, decorated with the kind of perfection that suggested no one actually lived there. He stopped at a door near the end of the hallway and opened it to reveal a bedroom that belonged in a 5-star hotel. King-sized bed with silk sheets, floor-to-ceiling windows, an ensuite bathroom visible through an open doorway. "This is the master suite," he said, setting her suitcase on a bench at the foot of the bed. "Yours now." "Ours," she corrected carefully, and watched something flicker in his eyes. He stepped closer and she fought the urge to step back. "We should discuss expectations," he said, his voice dropping lower. "This arrangement has certain requirements." Her heart hammered. The contract she'd signed had been 20 pages of legal language she'd barely understood, rushed through by Mrs. Choi with assurances that it was standard. "I need," he continued, and then stopped himself, jaw tightening. "I need you to understand that I have particular needs, medical needs that require strict adherence to schedules and protocols. That's why the doctor visits," she said, remembering the clause about bi-weekly medical consultations. "Yes," His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek so lightly she might have imagined it. "And other needs that you'll learn about in time." The way he said it made her shiver, though she couldn't tell if it was from fear or something far more dangerous. She'd noticed him during their first meeting, the way his eyes had lingered on her curves, the full figure that Korean beauty standards usually dismissed. She'd seen hunger there, quickly masked but unmistakable. That night, Funmi lay in the enormous bed, unable to sleep. Minho had excused himself after showing her the room, disappearing somewhere in the vast house. She'd explored the ensuite bathroom, marveling at the rainfall shower and the cabinet stocked with expensive skincare products. She'd unpacked her meager belongings, her clothes looking shabby in the walk-in closet clearly designed for someone with a much larger wardrobe. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hallway. They stopped outside her door. She held her breath, waiting for the knock that never came. Instead, she heard the soft click of something mechanical, then silence. In the morning, jet-lagged and disoriented, she woke to find Mrs. Park setting a breakfast tray on the bedside table. "Good morning, Mrs. Kang," the housekeeper said, and the name felt like wearing someone else's skin. Mr. Kang had business in the city today. He said you should rest and familiarize yourself with the house. "Where is he?" Funmi asked, sitting up and pulling the sheet higher. Mrs. Park's expression was carefully neutral. "He has a separate suite on the 3rd floor. For his work, he keeps unusual hours, so they wouldn't be sharing this bedroom." Relief and something uncomfortably close to disappointment warred in Funmi's chest. After breakfast, she explored. The house had 5 bedrooms, a home gym that looked recently used, a library with books in Korean, English, and Japanese. The kitchen was professional grade, clearly meant for a chef rather than home cooking. In the basement, she found a locked door with a keypad entry system. Something about it made her skin crawl, the way the door was reinforced steel painted to look like wood. When she asked Mrs. Park about it later, the woman's face went pale. "That's Mr. Kang's private workspace. We don't go down there." The way she said it felt like a warning. 3 days passed in strange isolation. Minho appeared for dinner each evening, perfectly polite, asking about her day in the tone of someone making conversation with a stranger at a bus stop. They ate in the formal dining room, him at one end of the long table, her at the other, the distance between them both physical and metaphorical. He never touched her again after that first night, never looked at her with the hunger she'd glimpsed in their initial meeting. It was like living with a ghost. On the 4th night, everything changed. Funmi couldn't sleep, the time difference still wreaking havoc on her system. She wandered downstairs around 2 a.m., thinking she'd make tea in that intimidating kitchen. She found Minho there instead, leaning against the counter in nothing but pajama pants, his torso bare and revealing a physique that made her mouth go dry. He was holding a glass of whiskey, and the look on his face was haunted, raw in a way his daytime mask never allowed. He looked up when she entered, and the hunger was back in his eyes, no longer hidden. "You should go back to bed," he said, but his voice was rough, desperate. "I couldn't sleep." She moved toward the kettle, hyper-aware of his gaze tracking her movements. The oversized t-shirt she wore as sleepwear suddenly felt too thin. Funmi. The way he said her name made her stop, made her turn to face him. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. "You should go back upstairs right now." "Why?" she asked, and some reckless part of her took a step closer instead of retreating. "Because I'm trying very hard to be a gentleman, and you're making it extremely difficult." His eyes dragged over her, lingering on her curves visible beneath the thin cotton. "What if I don't want you to be a gentleman?" The words escaped before she could stop them, born from 4 days of tension and the way he was looking at her like she was water, and he was dying of thirst. Minho set down his glass with careful control. "Do you understand what you're asking for? I'm asking why you married me if you plan to avoid me." Her chin lifted. "I'm asking why 3 wives left you. I'm asking what you're hiding in that basement." His laugh was dark, bitter. "You want the truth? My previous marriages failed because I couldn't control myself, because my needs, my appetites scared them away, because what I want from a wife isn't what most men want." "Show me," Funmi heard herself say, and watched his control snap like a brittle thread. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, his hand tangling in her hair as he backed her against the refrigerator. His mouth found hers, demanding, consuming, and she gasped against his lips. He tasted like whiskey and danger and something addictive she couldn't name. His free hand gripped her hip, pulling her against him, and she felt exactly how much he wanted her. "This is your last chance to run." He breathed against her mouth, and she answered by pulling him closer, by opening to him, by surrendering to the fire she'd felt building since the moment she'd signed her name next to his. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her upstairs. Not to the master suite, but to his private floor, to a room she'd never seen. The door closed behind them, and in the darkness, she heard the sound of that mechanical lock clicking into place from the inside this time. His hands were everywhere, reverent and desperate, mapping her curves like he was memorizing scripture. "You're so beautiful," he whispered against her neck, her collarbone, the swell of her breast through the thin shirt. So perfect, every curve, every inch of you. The shirt came off, then his pajama pants, and when their skin met, she understood why his ex-wives had run. Not because he was cruel or violent, but because the intensity of him was overwhelming, all-consuming, like standing in the path of a wildfire and choosing to burn. The next morning, Funmi woke alone in Minho's bed, morning light filtering through curtains she didn't remember him closing. Her body ached in ways that made her blush, marked with evidence of his possession. She found a note on the pillow beside her. "Had to go to the office. Stay in bed. Dr. Park will come by this afternoon for your first examination." The clinical tone of it doused some of the warmth left from the night. First examination. Like she was a patient, not a wife. She wrapped herself in his robe, breathing in the scent of him, and tried the door. It opened easily from the inside, but when she looked at the exterior, she saw what she'd missed in the darkness. The lock on the outside, just like the basement door. The soundproofing materials visible in the doorframe. This wasn't a bedroom. It was a cage built to contain something, or someone. Downstairs, Mrs. Park had breakfast waiting, but her eyes wouldn't meet Funmi's. The housekeeper knew. Of course she knew. She'd probably served breakfast to 3 previous Mrs. Kangs who'd woken up in that same room, wearing that same robe, carrying that same confusion and fear. Dr. Park arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, a man in his 60s with gentle hands and eyes that had seen too much. He sat up in the master suite, unpacking equipment from an unmarked bag. "Mrs. Kang," he said in careful English, "I need to perform a general examination. Your husband was quite insistent. What kind of examination?" Funmi sat on the bed, clutching the robe closed. "To ensure you're healthy enough for Mr. Kang's requirements. He requires a lot of stamina from his partners. The medication I provide helps with that." "Medication?" Her stomach twisted. "What kind of medication? Supplements? Vitamins? Some hormone regulators?" "Nothing dangerous, I assure you, all FDA approved." His smile was kind but firm. "Mr. Kang's previous wives found them very helpful. Until they didn't," she said quietly. "Until they ran away." Dr. Park's expression flickered with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Kang is a man of intense appetites. Not every woman can accommodate that long term. But you're different, I think. Stronger. How do you know?" "Because you're still here, asking questions instead of calling a lawyer." The examination was thorough, professional, and deeply unsettling. He took blood samples, checked her vitals, asked invasive questions about her medical history and her pain tolerance. When he left, he provided a weekly pill organizer with medications she didn't recognize, along with strict instructions about timing and dosage. Minho returned at 6 p.m. with flowers, expensive roses, that Mrs. Park immediately arranged in a crystal vase. He found Funmi in the library, curled up with a book she wasn't actually reading. "How was Dr. Park?" he asked, sitting beside her on the leather sofa. His proximity made her pulse race, her body remembering everything from the night before. "You drugged your other wives," she said, not looking at him. "To keep up with you." His hand found hers, thumb stroking her knuckles. "I didn't drug them. I provided supplements to help with recovery and energy. Being with me is physically demanding, Funmi. I won't apologize for that." "So you locked them in, the soundproofed room?" "The cage you built upstairs?" His jaw tightened. "That room exists because I needed a space where I couldn't hear them leaving. Where I could pretend for a few hours that I was normal, that I didn't drive away everyone who tried to love me." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in her chest. "I'm not running," she said, turning to face him fully. "But I need to understand what I married into. What you need from me, everything." His eyes held hers, dark and desperate. "I need everything you're willing to give. And then more. I need to touch you, taste you, own you in ways that are probably unhealthy. I need you so much it scares me. And that's why I've been avoiding you. Because once I start, I won't be able to stop." "Then don't stop," Funmi said, and watched his control shatter again. This time, they made it to the master suite, and in the afternoon light, she saw him fully. The desperation in his touch, the worship in his kisses, the way he handled her like she was precious and essential, and his. Afterwards, tangled in sweat-dampened sheets, He told her about the pharmaceutical company he'd built, about the experimental stamina drugs he'd been testing on himself for years, about how the side effects had made him insatiable, had destroyed his first marriage before he'd understood what was happening to him. The second and third wives were after I knew, he admitted, his fingers tracing patterns on her hip. I thought I could manage it, control it. I couldn't. They left within months, terrified of what I'd become. And now you're stuck with a monster. You're not a monster, Funmi said firmly. You're a man with a medical condition that happens to be highly unusual. There are worse things, like being a debt collector's target in Lagos. His smile was soft, understanding. I paid your family's debts because I wanted to help. But I married you because when I saw you in that first interview, something in me recognized something in you. Strength, resilience, the ability to handle intensity that would break others. That doesn't mean I'm unbreakable, she said quietly. I know, his forehead pressed against hers. That's why we'll figure this out together. Why I'll never lock that door from the outside unless you ask me to. Why I'll always give you the key to leave. She didn't tell him that she was starting to think she didn't want the key. That being consumed by him felt less like drowning and more like finally learning to breathe. The first month passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Funmi learned the routines of Minho's household, the careful schedules that governed his life. The medications he took 3 times daily, the supplements Dr. Park delivered weekly, the careful monitoring of his vitals that confirmed he was playing a dangerous game with his own biochemistry. She learned about his company, Kang Pharmaceuticals, and the revolutionary stamina enhancement drugs they were developing. Drugs that promised to help cancer patients maintain strength during treatment, that could aid elderly individuals in maintaining independence. Drugs that Minho had tested on himself before human trials were approved. Impatient with the regulatory process, and convinced of his own invincibility, the side effects had been catastrophic and permanent. His body now required levels of physical intimacy that bordered on medical necessity. Without regular release, he experienced pain, insomnia, psychological distress. With it, he was functional, successful, almost normal, except for the insatiable hunger that never quite went away. They fell into patterns. Mornings, he worked from home, video conferences with international partners while Funmi took Korean language lessons with a tutor. Afternoons, she explored Seoul's art galleries and museums, always accompanied by one of Minho's security team, a precaution he insisted on. Evenings were theirs alone, dinner and conversation that gradually became less stilted, more real. Nights were when the hunger took over, when the careful control he maintained all day shattered, when he reached for her with hands that shook with need. She learned to anticipate it, to read the signs. The tension in his shoulders, the darkening of his eyes, the way his fingers would drum against surfaces like he was trying to burn off energy he couldn't contain. She learned what he needed, how to handle the intensity, how to surrender to it without losing herself. But it was exhausting. 6 weeks in, she understood why the others had left. Not because Minho was cruel or violent. He was unfailingly gentle even in his desperation. But because being needed that intensely, that constantly, was like being slowly consumed. She started taking the medications Dr. Park prescribed. Energy supplements, hormone regulators, vitamins designed to help her body recover faster. They helped. But they also made her wonder what line she was crossing, what price she'd pay later for accommodating a hunger that was fundamentally insustainable. One evening, after a particularly intense night that had left her body aching despite the medications, Minho found her crying in the bathroom. She tried to hide it, splashing water on her face, but he was already kneeling beside her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm hurting you," he said, and the devastation in his voice made her cry harder. "Not the way you think," she managed. "It's not pain. It's just, I don't know how to keep up, how to be enough. You are enough." He pulled her against his chest, holding her like she was precious. "God, Funmi, you're more than enough. I'm the problem, I'm the one who's broken." "Then fix it," she said. "Stop taking the drugs. Find a way to reverse this." "There is no reversal." His voice was hollow. "I consulted every specialist on 3 continents. The changes to my biochemistry are permanent. This is who I am now. Then we adjust," she said, pulling back to look at him. "We find a way that doesn't destroy me in the process. Tell me what you need." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Then I need you to tell me when it's too much. I need you to have the strength to say no, because I can't trust myself to know when I'm pushing too far. Can you do that?" She nodded, and they made a new pact. Safe words, boundaries, scheduled breaks where he would leave for a few days to let her recover. It wasn't perfect, but it was sustainable. And gradually, Funmi felt like she could breathe again. 3 months in, she met Minho's mother. The visit was announced with only 2 days' notice. Mrs. Choi appearing at breakfast with a tense expression and a schedule of expectations. Mrs. Kang Sr. is coming from Busan, the assistant explained. She'll expect a formal dinner, appropriate dress, and evidence that this marriage is legitimate. Minho looked grim. My mother doesn't know about my condition. She thinks my previous marriages failed due to incompatibility. Let's keep it that way. The dinner was a nightmare of barely concealed hostility. Mrs. Kang Sr. was elegant, cold, and clearly disappointed that her son had married a foreigner. She spoke in rapid Korean that Funmi could only partially follow, forcing Minho to translate, which only highlighted Funmi's outsider status. "You're very curvy," the older woman observed in English, her tone making it sound like an insult. Korean men usually prefer more delicate figures. "I'm not trying to appeal to Korean men in general," Funmi replied carefully. "Just your son, and he seems quite satisfied with my figure." Minho's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. His mother's eyes narrowed. The previous wives were also foreigners. "I'm starting to think my son has peculiar tastes. Or maybe he just knows what he wants," Minho said, his voice carrying an edge that made his mother's lips thin. "Mother, Funmi is my wife. She's not going anywhere. We'll see," Mrs. Kang said, turning her attention to her soup. "They all leave eventually." After she departed, a whirlwind of disapproval and expensive perfume, Minho pulled Funmi into his arms. "I'm sorry," he murmured against her hair. "She's always been like that. Critical, cold, impossible to please. Where do you think I learned to be so controlled? Is that why you became a scientist?" Funmi asked. "To prove something to her?" He laughed, bitter and sharp. "Maybe. Or maybe I just wanted to fix the unfixable, starting with myself. The irony is that I broke myself worse in the process." That night, he was more intense than usual. His touch almost desperate, like he needed to prove his mother wrong, needed to confirm that Funmi was still there, still his. She let him consume her, understanding that sometimes the only way through intensity was surrender. 4 months in, the first real danger appeared, not from Minho's appetites, but from his business. A rival pharmaceutical company had been trying to acquire Kang Pharmaceuticals for years, blocked each time by Minho's refusal to sell. When acquisition didn't work, they tried sabotage. The break-in happened while Funmi was home alone, Minho away at a conference in Tokyo. She heard glass shattering downstairs, voices in Korean, the heavy footsteps of multiple intruders. Fear turned her blood to ice. She locked herself in Minho's upstairs suite, the soundproofed room he'd built, and called his cell. The sound of his voice, sharp with alarm, grounded her panic. "I'm sending security now. Stay in the safe room. Don't open the door for anyone except them." She heard more breaking glass, furniture overturning, the crash of something heavy. Then gunshots. 2 sharp cracks that made her scream into the phone. "Funmi, talk to me. Are you hurt?" His voice was desperate. "I'm okay. I'm in the room. But Minnie, they have guns. Security will handle it. Just stay hidden." She heard him shouting orders to someone else, probably his security chief. "I'm coming home. Stay on the line with me." The next 15 minutes felt like hours. She heard sirens, more gunshots, then silence. When the knock came at the safe room door, she nearly didn't answer. But the voice on the other side was familiar. "Mrs. Kang, it's Chief Han. The intruders have been neutralized. You're safe now." She opened the door to find 3 men in dark suits, one bleeding from a shoulder wound, all looking grim. The house was a wreck. Furniture overturned, artwork slashed, papers scattered everywhere. But the destruction was strategic. They'd been looking for something specific in Minho's office files. Chief Han escorted her to the master suite and stood guard while she packed a bag. "We're taking you to a secure location until Mr. Kang arrives. This was a targeted hit, and they'll try again." "Who are they?" Funmi asked, hands shaking as she threw clothes into a suitcase. "Chemcore Industries. They've been trying to acquire Mr. Kang's research for years. Tonight they decided to steal it instead." The secure location was a penthouse apartment in downtown Seoul, fortified like a bunker, and staffed with more security than seemed necessary. Minho arrived at 2 a.m., still in his conference suit, his face carved from stone. He swept her into his arms the moment he saw her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "Thank God," he breathed into her hair. "Thank God you're safe. Are you okay?" "Did they hurt you?" "I'm fine." She pulled back to look at him, seeing the terror underneath his control. "Scared, but fine. Who were they?" "What did they want?" "My research files. The formulations for the stamina drugs." He guided her to the sofa, keeping her close. "Chemcore has been trying to replicate my work for years. They're desperate enough to resort to theft and violence. This is my fault. You could have been killed." "But I wasn't," she said firmly. "Your security handled it. But Minho, this proves you're in danger. Your work, your life, everything is at risk. He was quiet for a moment, staring at their joined hands. Maybe it's time to shut it all down. Sell the company, destroy the research, remove the target from my back. You'd do that? She asked. Give up everything you've built? For you? His eyes met hers. Absolutely certain. In a heartbeat. The company, the research, my reputation, none of it matters if you're not safe. I've already lost 3 wives to my condition. I won't lose you to my enemies. The declaration should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like chains, like the weight of his need transforming into another kind of cage. But before she could voice her concerns, he was kissing her, desperate and claiming, and she let herself get lost in the familiar fire of him. The next morning, Minho announced he was selling Kang Pharmaceuticals, not to Chemcore, but to a trusted competitor in Switzerland. A company with the resources to continue his research ethically and the security infrastructure to protect it from corporate espionage. It'll take months to finalize, he told her over breakfast in the safe house penthouse. But once it's done, we'll be free. We can go anywhere you want, do anything. I can focus on being your husband instead of a target. What about your condition? Funmi asked carefully. The medications, the treatments. How will you manage without the company resources? I'll figure it out. His hand covered hers. Maybe without the stress of running an empire. My body will stabilize. Maybe we'll find a new normal. Or maybe she'd be dealing with this intensity forever, bound to a man whose hunger was both a medical condition and a life sentence. But looking at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, she didn't have the heart to voice her doubts. 5 months in, they left Korea, not permanently, but for an extended honeymoon while the sale finalized. Minho chose an island resort in the Philippines, private villas with their own beaches, staff who respected privacy, and enough isolation that he could let his guard down. For 3 weeks, they lived in a bubble of salt water and sunshine. Minho's hunger didn't disappear. The condition was permanent after all, but somehow it felt different away from Seoul's pressure, more manageable, more like passion than compulsion. They swam in crystal water, ate fresh seafood, made love on beaches at midnight. Funmi felt her body finally recovering, the constant exhaustion fading. The medications Dr. Park had prescribed ran out, and she didn't ask for refills, curious to see if she could manage without chemical assistance. She could, barely, but she could. On their last night at the resort, lying tangled in sheets that smelled like ocean and expensive laundry detergent, Minho turned to her with unusual seriousness. I need to tell you something, he said, about why the others really left. She waited, pulse quickening. I thought at first it was the intensity, the physical demands, he continued slowly, but the last wife, Yuki, she told me the truth before she left. She said she felt like she was disappearing. Like being consumed by my need was erasing her identity, her personhood. Like she stopped being Yuki, and just became the thing that fed my hunger. His voice cracked. I'm terrified I'm doing that to you. Funmi took his hand, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes it feels that way, she admitted. Like I'm more medicine than wife, but that's on me too. For not speaking up. For not setting boundaries. For letting myself be consumed because it felt easier than fighting. So what do we do? He asked. How do we fix this? We start treating me like a partner, not a prescription, she said. You involve me in decisions. You ask about my dreams, my goals, not just my capacity to handle your needs. You remember that I'm a person with my own desires, not just a solution to your problem. Can you do that? I can try. He pulled her closer. God, Funmi, I want to try. Because you're not just medicine to me. You're the first person in years who's made me feel like more than my condition. Like maybe I'm still human underneath all this. Then we'll figure it out together, she said. One day at a time. When they returned to Seoul, reality crashed back with force. The sale of Kang Pharmaceuticals had stalled, Chemcore mounting legal challenges that tied everything up in regulatory review. Minho spent 12-hour days with lawyers and corporate strategists, coming home exhausted and tense. His hunger intensified with the stress, his body demanding release he was sometimes too tired to properly manage. The medications ran low, Dr. Park having difficulty securing new supplies without the company infrastructure. They were spiraling, and Funmi could feel it. 6 months in, everything came to a head. Minho collapsed during a board meeting, his body finally revolting against years of biochemical manipulation. They rushed him to a private hospital where specialists ran tests that confirmed what Dr. Park had feared. The experimental drugs had caused permanent damage to his endocrine system. His body was slowly destroying itself, caught in a feedback loop of overproduction and exhaustion. He had maybe a year, possibly less, before organ failure became inevitable, unless they tried an experimental treatment, another drug, another risk. Another throw of the dice. Minho refused. Funmi found him in his hospital room, staring out the window at Seoul's skyline, looking more defeated than she'd ever seen him. "I'm not taking more drugs," he said before she could speak. "I'm not turning myself into more of a monster than I already am." "You're not a monster," she said, sitting beside his bed. "You're a man who made choices that had consequences. But that doesn't mean you give up. What's the alternative?" he asked bitterly. "Live another year as an addict, consuming you until there's nothing left? Watch you disappear the way the others did? Die slowly while you play nursemaid? That's not living." "None of those are the only options," she said firmly. "We try the treatment. We hope it works. And if it doesn't, we make what time we have count for something." He turned to look at her. Really look at her. "Why are you still here? After everything, why haven't you run?" "Because I love you," she said, and realized it was true. "I love you despite the hunger and the intensity and the impossibility of the situation. I love you because underneath the condition, you're kind and brilliant and trying so hard to be better. I love you because leaving would hurt more than staying. I don't deserve you." His voice broke. "You deserve someone who can love you without consuming you." "Maybe," she said, "but I chose you anyway. So stop trying to be noble and let me make my own decisions about what I can handle." They tried the treatment. 8 weeks of infusions, of carefully monitored drug cocktails designed to reset his endocrine system. The side effects were brutal, worse than anything before. Some days Minho couldn't get out of bed, his body racked with pain as his biochemistry recalibrated. The hunger disappeared entirely, which should have been relief, but instead left him hollow, disconnected from the drives that had defined him for years. Funmi stayed beside him through all of it, holding him through the pain, feeding him when he was too weak to eat, talking him through the psychological withdrawal of suddenly not needing anything at all. In the 9th week, something shifted. The pain subsided. His appetite returned. Normal human appetite for food and connection. The doctors ran tests, cautious but increasingly optimistic. Whatever they'd done had worked, at least partially. The compulsive hunger was gone, the dangerous feedback loop broken. What remained was something closer to normal. Human desire informed by attraction and emotion, rather than biochemical imperative. The first time they made love after his recovery was different. Slower, softer, present in a way they'd never managed before. Minho touched her like he was memorizing her, like he finally had the time and attention to truly see her. Afterwards, he cried. For the years lost to addiction, for the wives who'd fled, for the monster he'd become and finally escaped. 7 months in, they were learning each other again. Minho without the hunger was still intense, still passionate, but now there was space for conversation and gentle touches, and days where they didn't have sex at all. He'd asked her what she wanted to do with her life, really asked, and listened when she talked about maybe pursuing art therapy, about wanting to help others who'd been through trauma. He'd helped her apply to programs, had supported her when she'd been accepted to a graduate school, starting in the fall. They were becoming partners. Equal weight instead of the gravity of his need pulling her into constant orbit. But healing wasn't linear. There were still hard days, moments when Minho struggled with the psychological aftermath of addiction, when he reached for her out of habit and panic rather than desire. There were nights when Funmi felt the exhaustion creeping back, remembered what it had felt like to be consumed. They went to couples therapy, both individual and together, working through trauma that had no easy answers. 8 months in, Funmi met the first ex-wife. Her name was Sarah, Australian, and she'd been Minho's second marriage. She reached out through a mutual contact, asking to meet for coffee, to share something important. They met in a quiet cafe in Itaewon, 2 women bound by shared experience with the same complicated man. Sarah was beautiful, poised, and carried the wariness of someone who'd survived something most people couldn't understand. "I heard about his treatment," Sarah said carefully, "that it worked, that he's different now." She studied Funmi's face. "Are you okay? Surviving?" Funmi said. "Some days barely, but mostly okay." "Why did you reach out?" "Because I needed you to know it wasn't your fault if you'd left," Sarah said. "The others and I, we talk sometimes. Support group of sorts. We blamed ourselves for not being strong enough, enduring enough. But the truth is, no one could have sustained what he needed. Not long term, not without destroying themselves." "And I'm not destroyed," Funmi said. "Not yet anyway." Sarah's smile was sad. "Give it time. The erosion is subtle. You don't notice until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize yourself. Unless he's really different now. Unless the treatment actually changed things." "It did," Funmi said, wanting to believe it. "He's different. We're different." "I hope so," Sarah said. "For both your sakes. Because he's not a bad man, just a dangerous one. And love isn't always enough to protect you from danger. The conversation haunted Funmi for days. She looked at Minho with new eyes, watching for signs of the man he'd been, the hunger that might return. But what she saw instead was someone fighting every day to be better, to choose health over compulsion, to love her as a partner rather than a necessity. 9 months in, they renewed their vows. Not because the first marriage wasn't real, but because they wanted to celebrate what they'd become. The ceremony was small, just close friends and Mrs. Park who cried through the entire thing. Minho's mother even attended, her approval grudging but present. They spoke vows they'd written themselves. Minho promised to see her, truly see her, every day for the rest of his life. To never let his needs, medical or otherwise, eclipse her personhood. To love her as an equal, not a solution. Funmi promised to be honest, to speak up when things were too much, to never disappear into caregiving at the cost of her own identity, to love him without losing herself. When they kissed, it felt like a beginning, rather than a continuation, like they'd finally reached the marriage they'd signed up for 9 months ago. 10 months in, Funmi discovered she was pregnant. The news came with complications, her body's hormone levels still recovering from months of supplements and medications. The doctors weren't sure if she could carry to term, if her system could handle the stress. Minho was terrified. The idea of her body going through more strain because of him, even indirectly, nearly broke him. He wanted her to terminate, to choose her health over a potential life. But Funmi wanted to try, wanted to believe her body could do this, that she was stronger than the past 10 months suggested. They compromised on careful monitoring, weekly appointments with specialists, plans in place for every possible complication. The pregnancy was difficult. Morning sickness that lasted all day, exhaustion that medications couldn't touch, her body struggling to nourish both herself and the growing life inside her. There were days she regretted her choice, days she was certain her body would give out. But Minho was there through all of it, attentive and supportive in ways that had nothing to do with his own needs. He brought her ginger tea for nausea, rubbed her swollen feet, stayed up late researching pregnancy complications and remedies. He put her health above everything, even his work, even the final details of selling his company. 11 months in, Funmi went into early labor. 36 weeks, the baby measuring small but viable. The delivery was long and difficult, her body pushed to its absolute limit. For hours she labored, Minho beside her holding her hand, whispering encouragement, being the partner she needed. When their daughter finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming her arrival into the world, Funmi felt something click into place. This was what they'd been building toward. Not the contract marriage, not the hunger and intensity, but this moment of shared creation and love. They named her Hope, because that's what she represented. Hope that they could build something healthy, from something that started broken. Hope that love could be more than consumption. Hope that family could be chosen and fought for and protected. A year in, Funmi looked back at the woman who'd signed that marriage certificate and barely recognized her. She'd been desperate, isolated, willing to trade herself for her family's security. Now she was a mother, a graduate student, a wife to a man who'd learned to love her without consuming her. The road hadn't been easy. There were still hard days, moments when Minho struggled with the psychological echoes of his addiction, when Funmi felt the exhaustion creeping back. But they'd built something real from the ashes of what could have been her destruction. They'd created a family from a business transaction. They'd found love in the spaces between hunger and healing. On their first anniversary, Minho gave her a key. Not to the house, she already had that, but to the safe room upstairs, the soundproofed space he'd built to contain his darkness. Inside, he'd transformed it. The restraints were gone, replaced by art supplies and a desk. The lock only worked from the inside now, making it a sanctuary rather than a cage. "It's yours," he said. "A space for your work, your art, your therapy practice someday. A room where you can go and just be yourself. Separate from me, from motherhood, from everything. A room with a lock you control." She cried, understanding what the gift meant. He was giving her back the autonomy she'd lost, was proving he understood that love meant space as much as closeness. They made love that night in the master suite, their daughter sleeping peacefully down the hall, and it was tender and equal, and nothing like the desperate consuming hunger of those first months. It was sustainable. It was healthy. It was real. Afterwards, tangled in sheets that no longer felt like a battleground, Funmi thought about the housekeeper's warning from a year ago. The lock on the outside, the soundproof walls, The 3 ex-wives who'd run. She'd signed that contract thinking she'd married a businessman, not realizing she was entering a cage built by trauma and biochemistry. But she'd also discovered something the others hadn't. That cages could be unlocked from the inside. That hunger could be healed. That love, real love, was worth fighting for even when the odds seemed impossible. Minho stirred beside her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "Thank you," he murmured, half asleep. "For staying, for fighting, for loving me even when I was unlovable." "You were never unlovable," she said. "Just lost, we both were." His arms tightened around her. "Are we found now?" She thought about their daughter sleeping down the hall, about the therapy practice she'd start next year, about the man who'd learned to love her without losing himself to addiction, about the marriage that had started as a transaction and become something irreplaceable. "Yeah," she said, "I think we are." Outside, Seoul glittered with a million lights, each one a story, a life, a choice made in darkness that led toward light. Inside, in their bedroom with its unlocked door and their sleeping daughter down the hall, Funmi and Minho held each other and slept the dreamless sleep of people who'd survived their own destruction and chosen to build something better from the ruins. The contract marriage that should have destroyed her had instead become her salvation. The hunger that should have consumed her had instead taught her strength. The cage she'd entered had become a home, not because the darkness disappeared, but because they'd learned to face it together. And in the morning, when hope's cry woke them both, they'd rise together to face another day. Not as captor and captive, not as addict and enabler, but as partners in the truest sense. 2 people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen, every day, to walk toward the light together. The end was just another beginning, and for the first time in a year, Funmi was ready for whatever came next.